The reason why we are able to have meaningful discourse is that we have created a space where we don't entertain the ideas of Nazis. But I want to unpack the what Zizek is on about, because this is when we're talking about we were talking about electoralism not being possible. Electoralism isn't possible because we don't have the material conditions to put leftists into office. We don't have the material conditions to put leftists into office, so for us to consider electoralism to be anything worthwhile, for us to dedicate any amount of time to, we need to change the material conditions such that such a thing is possible. But what does that mean? When I've been talking about a lot of these, it's hard to understand. His speech impediment is difficult to get through. When I'm talking about how we solve the problems of food sovereignty, how we solve the problems of land back, when I talk about these things, I talk about them dialectically, and I'm asking you, what I'm asking the chat, what I'm asking you to think about is, what are the material conditions necessary to bring about the thing that we want to accomplish? This isn't dialectics, this is transcendental reasoning. These are two different processes, and now we're going to have to separate these two things out and talk about them explicitly. Right. Yeah, so let's see what he has to say. Turn the music down too while we're doing that. Weird. Pause. Well, let me know if the volume needs to be turned up.
In psychoanalysis especially, we know how knowledge does not necessarily involve truth, even if it is a true knowledge in the sense of adequate knowledge.
Okay, so I don't know what adequate knowledge is, but what he's saying is knowledge does not necessarily involve truth. This is very important, because just because something isn't true doesn't mean it's not knowledge. We've talked about this before on stream. I'm not sure if it was last time or the time before. If you're creating a science fiction story, if you're just telling it to yourself in your head and you're not even writing it down, you're just making up an imaginary story with imaginary characters, an imaginary world, that is knowledge. None of that is true, right? You're creating a story that's completely fiction. But what you're creating is knowledge. When a novelist sits down and writes a story about a fictitious person in a fictitious scenario doing fictitious things, that is the building of knowledge. This is the construction of knowledge, right? So when we're talking about this relationship between knowledge and truth, oftentimes people confuse these two things as the same. And what Zizek is trying to draw out is they can be entirely independent. You can't have knowledge without truth. You can't have truth without knowledge. We actually have both of these quite an awful lot. But because we want what we know to be true, we assert that it ought to be. And so what we do is we build a narrative which explains it. So this is going to cause us to have a major problem in a minute with where we're trying to go with this. Let's see what Zizek has to say about it.
For example, we all know, I hope they're so well known, Lacan's outrageous statement that even if, it's a little bit male chauvinist, but nonetheless, even if a jealous husband claims that his wife is cheating him, that she sleeps around with other men, even if they are all true, his jealousy is still pathological.
Okay, so this is what he's speaking to. Now, this is not super important, but I'm setting up the background. What he's speaking to here is the Othello example used by Bertrand Russell to argue about correspondence theory. That's what he's on about. That's why he's bringing up the husband jealous about his wife. Usually when Zizek is, because I've seen Zizek use the same example in a few different places. When he brings up the husband that's jealous about his wife, what he's talking about is Bertrand Russell's explanation of correspondence theory, and that we have truth, according to the theory, when what we believe corresponds with state of affairs in the real world. So if the jealous husband believes that he has reason to be jealous, and it turns out that there is an affair going on, then what the jealous person has is truth, right? The point of this, the postmodern reality of this, is that whether or not there's truth, whether or not she's actually having an affair, doesn't matter as much that the person believes that it does, because the belief is pathological, and the belief is going to determine this person's actions, and it's going to determine this person's material reality, whether or not this is true. Correspondence is irrelevant. Whether the person's belief corresponds with the true state of affairs in the world is irrelevant. That doesn't matter. What matters is the person has the belief. Truth is irrelevant. The person has a belief, and this belief determines this person's viewpoint, and it's going to determine their actions, and it's going to determine their judgments. That's the takeaway that we should be trying to get.
So that the factual truth can be, or adequacy can be combined with untruth. Why? Let me give you a much more traumatic example, which makes the same point clearly. Let's take what Nazis claimed about the Jews. I think we have to go to the end here and claim, even if, okay, not all, I wouldn't go so far, but even if some of what they claimed was true, nonetheless, anti-Semitism was totally a lie, a fake. Why? I think that's my general point, that the moment you even think about endorsing, accepting discussion at this level, like for example, let's say, I don't know, I'm a Nazi, you are an honest liberal, and I say Jews seduce our young girls, Jews exploit us, and I say this. You say, no, this is a lie. Then comes a naive university neutral idiot and says, oh, it's difficult, let's take an objective look at it. You sell your soul to the devil if you do this, because let's be clear, the result will be unambiguous. Yes, the Nazis exaggerated it, but not quite. Because, wait a minute, now say something horrible. Many Jews were also rich in Germany, so yes, they definitely
We're probably going
exploited
to have to watch this a second
On the other
time.
hand, I hope so, it's normal. I think that some Jews definitely probably were seducing German girls. Why not? You know what I mean? Why is this false? Because the true, how to put it, the Nazis here, even if it were to be true, but it wasn't, of course, they lied in the guise of truth. Because the true question is not, is it true what they are claiming about the Jews? The true question is why, in order to sustain their politics, they need this fantasy of the Jew. Why they need this phantasmatic figure of the Jew?
That's the question. That's the question. It's not whether or not it's true. The question is, why do they need this fantasy? Why, in order to sustain their politics, do they need this fantasy of the truth? Right? So, we have a situation where we're considering whether we are going to... We have two people that are having a disagreement. We have an honest liberal, and we have a Nazi. We're having a disagreement. And then we have a third party come in that says, well, let's look at this objectively. We are already fucked, is what Zizek is saying. We've already gone too far. Pull this up a little bit. right? The fact that the current material conditions are such that this knowledge, whether or not what the Nazi is saying is true, is absolutely irrelevant. Whether or not this knowledge has any truth value that the Nazi is proposing is completely irrelevant. The fact that we are considering what the Nazi has to say is the problem, right? The fact that the material conditions are such that this knowledge is considered worthy of entertaining on neutral terms means that we have ceded the grounds of power knowledge already too far. So this isn't dialectics. This is a transcendental reduction, which we get from. Okay, so let's talk about what the transcendental question is. The transcendental asks, what must be the case? What are the contingent material conditions in forming this state of affairs? Thank you, Anonymous, for the tip. I very much appreciate the 10 bits. That's awesome. Thank you very much. I started saying this in various chats. Yeah, listening to reactionaries like Vosh. Yeah, screw Vosh. I can't wait until Vosh is just gone and completely irrelevant. Vosh is so unimportant. Anyways, when asking if the debate between the liberal and the Nazi can be resolved, we're asking the wrong question. It sounds like he is saying, if you debate, you've already lost, but he's not. He's saying the fact that such debate has any worth, is worth any consideration at all is the problem. I will, but I've got it. Okay, so the problem of metaphysics originally was that Descartes kept trying to assert that the mind impressed upon the world ideas, and John Locke kept trying to assert that the world impressed ideas upon the mind. Both of these are dualistic ways of thinking. Both of these are linear ways of thinking. Exactly the problems that Lao Tzu has pointed out several times already in the short time that he's been in the stream, talking about these are the problems, the dualistic and the linear modes of thinking. And these two ways of thinking are perfect examples of why this always fails. When Immanuel Kant comes on to the scene and takes these ideas up, instead of trying to prove that we have an experience of the world, or instead of trying to prove that the world impresses ideas upon our mind, Immanuel Kant says those things are the case. It is the case that we have a conscious experience of the world. It is the case that the world impresses ideas upon us. It is the case that our ideas change things in the world. This is the conscious experience. Let's stop trying to prove whether or not these things are true. We know that they are. We're doing them. We know that we gain knowledge from the world. You're gaining it right now. We know that our ideas affect the world. You're doing it right now. We know that these are the case. Stop trying to prove that we can have interactions with the world and accept that we do. Right? So the transcendental question is not trying to prove that we have an experience of the world. The transcendental question is trying to find the conditions which make that, the necessary conditions which make that possible. We have a conscious experience of the world. Trying to prove that we do doesn't make any sense. We have a conscious experience of the world. What must be the case for that conscious experience to be possible? What are the necessary conditions for consciousness? Consciousness. You have to have a consciousness, and we've talked about the rules of metaphysics before, right? What are the rules of metaphysics? Usually it's if there's a subject, that subject exists. If a subject exists, that subject has properties. Those properties exist in time and place. These are the fundamental rules of metaphysics. Everything must cohere to this. The reason why everything must cohere to this is because if these necessary things are not the case, conscious experience doesn't make sense. For things to exist, they have to have properties. Those properties exist in a time and place. There's nothing that you can do to divorce these truths from being necessarily true. They are literally the faculties with which you apprehend reality, is by apprehending things by virtue of the properties, because those properties exist in a time and space. You also exist in a time and space. This is a relationship that you share. These are the necessary conditions for consciousness. Trying to argue about whether or not these things are true is incoherent. They obviously are. Trying to prove that these are true is incoherent, because obviously these things are true. If they weren't true, we could not have a conscious experience of the world. We couldn't gain knowledge from that conscious experience. So the transcendental question is not trying to figure out that the conscious experience is true. It's trying to figure out the necessary conditions which make that true. But the purpose is, we're not trying to prove whether or not something is true, right? We have a conscious experience of the world. Proving that that is true doesn't make any sense. It's not going to do any work. That's what most of Western philosophy was trying to do for like 1,000 years, is trying to prove that the conscious experience of the world is true. And this was a huge waste of time. Thousands of years of philosophy, yeah. I'm telling you, 1,000 years of philosophy was a huge waste of time. We just wasted our time. We got nothing. Until Immanuel Kant was like, we have a conscious experience of the world. What are the necessary conditions that make that possible? And this is actually where we're going to get into materialism, and what the Comrade Kenny was talking about, where we have to have our ideas and our reason and our thought need to be grounded in materialism. Because if they're not, then we're in the world of idealism, and we're not actually focused on material conditions. We're not focused on changing the world. We're not focused on understanding the world in the first place, which is where we go back to Zizek, right? So the problem isn't that when we engage with Nazis, we have already lost the debate. That's true, but that's not what Zizek is saying. What Zizek is saying, and yes, I'm going to pronounce it wrong forever. What Zizek is saying is, because the material conditions are such that Nazis get considered, we've already lost. When anybody anywhere is willing to take the argument of a Nazi seriously, we've all already lost. The landscape of ideology is so discordant with a meaningful reality. It's so discordant with a meaningful reality that people are willing to take Nazis seriously in the first place. We shouldn't be entertaining whether or not what a Nazi says is true. That's the problem. We should be at a point where when a Nazi says, hey, I have an idea, everybody says, shut up, Nazi, right? You shouldn't exist. Go away, right? We are in a situation where the liberal discussions that we have about politics are meaningless. They get us nothing, and they get us nowhere, and they're going to continue to get us nothing and get us nowhere, because the material conditions are such that we still consider Nazis worthy of consideration, that people are still going to take those ideas and champion them in the marketplace of ideas. That's what's wrong. The material conditions are such that we still take Nazis seriously, right? That's the problem. Not that we are willing to debate them. And let's take this a step further, right? When we're talking about this conflict in Palestine, and we're talking about whether or not these people have a right to indigeneity, that is already a problem. We've already lost. Before anybody asks any question, the fact that people's indigeneity is in question is the problem. We shouldn't be having that conversation. Whether or not there's any truth to be had there is irrelevant. That's not the right question, right? That we're debating that those people deserve to be their own land and to have autonomy on their own land should not be a question. The fact that it is a question means that there's no debate that we can have that can win that fight.